Alright, hello citizens of the Nigelverse. It is Nigel here once again, and welcome back to the Monday Night Wars. Real quick before we get into it, a couple things for starters. I had tried to do this one last week, but my audio cut out, so we're trying again this week. But also, as I seek to finish up the Monday Night Wars, we are a bit past due, but we will try our best to make it work. What I'm going to do is that every Monday will be the next Monday Night Wars analysis will be the next episode of the Monday Night Wars analysis, and with the subsequent review for the day. So, we're gonna do it that way. Nevertheless, let's see what's going down here in Monday Night Raw and Monday Nitro. So if you remember from the last episode, we are still in the period of the 83 weeks where WCW Monday Nitro was on top. The NWO still going strong, running roughshod. Sting faced Hogan for the title. He beat him for it, but not without controversy at Starrcade 1997, he would eventually gain it back for reals this time at Super Brawl 8 in February 1998. Or I believe it was February 1998, but Sting would gain it back in 1998, gain the WCW Championship. There's other things going on in the undercard, such as the Cruiserweight division. Cruiserweight division is on fire, especially with guys like Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero and Billy Kidman at the helm. Meanwhile, in the WF is finding its attitude. Bret Hart is out because of the Montreal Screwjob. D-Generation X is officially formed. The first Hell in a Cell is in the books. Stone Cold Steve Austin is continuing his main event rise, and so let's see what's going down here in 1998. So, if you've seen these before, or if you've seen these episodes of the Monday Night Wars before, you kind of already know how this works, or have an idea of how this works. But if you haven't, what we have here is the ratings for both with Monday Night Raw and Monday Nitro. So, Raw on the left, Monday Nitro on the right, and on the far left is the date. So let's see what's going down. We're not gonna go week by week, just as noting some things of interest. One thing of interest is that for the first time on the April 13th episode of Monday, on the April 13th episode of both Raw and Nitro, Raw finally snaps the 83-week streak, and finally beats Monday Nitro in the ratings. We'd see them kind of go back and forth when it comes to ratings over the next few weeks, but Raw's finally beat them in the ratings here, including this week where Raw got a 5.7 and Nitro only did a 1.72. And we're seeing a very significant dip. We see Raw, and I know I am gonna go kind of fast, but feel free to pause at any moment so you can get a really good look at the ratings. But we see Raw kind of somewhat steady for the most part. We see them stay within the 3s and the 4s, and we see them jump up to 5 from time to time, but otherwise staying in the 3s and 4s, so managing to do really well and keep their head above water. As now, in 1998, we are full swing into the Attitude Era, and you'll also notice that after the March 30th episode of Raw here, that Raw doesn't dip under 3, so it's 4 and above from that point forward. So Raw finally finding its footing now that it's found its attitude, finally fighting back when it comes to that. And meanwhile, with Nitro, we see them in the 4s and the 5s, but we also see them dip down at points into the 1s, into the 2s, but those are the only kind of couple outliers, the 1, 2 there. The rest is either 4, 5, or 3. But funnily enough, even despite both sides and how they are doing with their ratings. They both reached an average of 4.4, and you see I calculated based off just taking the average of each for the Raw column and the Nitro column. So, they both have a, but they both have a 4.4 average based on my calculations for the year. So Raw officially in fight back mode and having Nitro on the ropes at times. But as for what kind of storyline stuff are going on in the company at the time, for starters, in the WWF, The Rock has become the corporate champion. He turned heel, winning the Deadly Games tournament at Survivor Series 1998. This was after the title was vacated after Austin refused to declare a new champion. So Austin, in continuing, and you can see here, continuing his feud with Vince McMahon and to an extent the corporation throughout 1998, including we'll get more into it, but Austin was stripped of the WWE Championship. At first, he was double pinned by Kane and Undertaker when they had their triple threat at Breakdown, if I'm not mistaken. But then, and the title is vacated, so Undertaker and Kane are going to fight each other or to declare a new champion, and Austin is special guest referee, but Austin and doesn't doesn't properly declare a new champion. Instead, crowns himself the winner of the match, which is not how that works, but yeah, so the title is held up for the time being, and so the Deadly Games tournament is put in place at Survivor Series 1998, and the Deadly Games tournament considered one of the crowning achievements of not just the Attitude Era, but especially Vince Russo's booking of the WWF at this time. Vince Russo, of course, was the I believe the head writer at this time in WWF. But yeah, so the Survivor Series Deadly Games tournaments was as one of the big things, one of the crowning achievements when it comes to the Attitude Era. If there's one thing that Vince Russo did right, it was definitely tournaments. But at first, it seemed like Mankind was going to be the corporate champion, and Mankind and Vince having kind of a father-son relationship on screen. Mankind being very naive to Vince McMahon and his true nature, his true treachery, but ultimately it was a swerve, bro. As the Rock turned heel, locked the sharpshooter in on Mankind. Vince called for the bell, and the Rock was declared the new champion. Sound familiar? So Rock is the new corporate champion, and the Rock and Mankind would feud for the rest of the year, the rest of 1998 after Survivor Series, and into 1999. But next up, speaking of the Undertaker and Kane, they had united. It kind of going at each other, such as at WrestleMania 14 and in the aforementioned Triple Threat, but had also joined up as the Brothers of Destruction, and Undertaker admitting to starting the fire that killed his parents in the funeral home. So, yay, yikes! But they join up as the Brothers of Destruction, but they still come to blows, are still at odds at times. But another thing that I forgot to mention here, in my notes here, but it is also worth mentioning, this is around the time of the Brawl for All. You remember the Brawl for All? Good, me neither. But imagine, and for those of you who are unaware of the Brawl for All, imagine a bunch of shoot boxing matches is kind of designed to get one guy over. That guy doesn't get hit over, and we'll see what happens with the winner, that being Bart Gunn. We'll see what happens with him come 1999. But yeah, I said notable moments of storylines. I didn't say good ones. But yeah, so the Brawl for All kind of, and I know I'm kind of breezing past it. Really, that could be its own video. In fact, Brian Zane over at Wrestling with Regret did a video about it many moons ago. But yeah, Brawl for All, very bad. idea. And the guy was kind of supposed to get over that, being Dr. Dusty Williams, ended up getting eliminated within the tournament. You had guys like Dan Severn back out of the tournament, out of the tournament, and yeah. So just not everything that glittered in the Attitude Era was gold. But next up, as I mentioned earlier, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Mr. McMahon. Pretty much on essentially a week-to-week basis, Steve Austin making the boss's life a living hell, including attacking Vince McMahon at multiple points. He's attacking him with the Zamboni. He's spraying him and The Rock with the beer and everything, and attacking Vince McMahon in the hospital. Well, Austin just causing all kinds of chaos and making Vince McMahon's life miserable, filling his car with cement. And so Austin and McMahon, and of course, because Austin. Because Austin's very rebellious, Vince McMahon, and meanwhile doesn't see Austin as fitting the corporate image. So, a very kind of simple story, but told very effectively, and it was very interesting and compelling, which is why people want to tune in for it week after week. But next up is The Undertaker vs. Mankind, continuing their feud, including that iconic match with iconic moments at King of the Ring 1998, the Hell in a Cell match, where Mankind took not one but two very scary falls. One from the top of the cell to the announce tables below. And then one through the top of the cell. Went into thumbtacks. Tooth went through his nose. It's probably a moment. It's arguably, I believe it is still like one of the most replayed moments of not just the Attitude Era, but in all of WWE history. Moments that really defined, and especially Mankind, Mick Foley, and death was a crazy moment. A moment where Foley almost died. Apparently, Foley, they thought he was dead at one point. Terry Funk thought he was dead. Vince McMahon thought he was dead. Even Undertaker himself thought he was dead. Throughout the course of the match, and apparently in the spot where Mankind went through the top of the cell, apparently Mick Foley landed wrong. But if he had landed correctly the way he was supposed to, he could have died. It's still one of the craziest moments, one of the craziest matches. I reviewed it last year on the channel, so go check out that review. And really, no amount of words will really do the match justice. But check out the review anyway. But next up here, we have Mike Tyson. So, Mike Tyson is brought in to WWF, which makes sense. A celebrity involvement had paid off for WWF in the past, but also because Mike Tyson and the baddest man on the planet, and it adding that roughness and some of that legitimacy to WWE/WF in its Attitude Era state. It is the kind of special guest enforcer for Austin versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 14, which, spoiler alert, that's going to be the match that we're going to be talking about to tie in with 1998 here in the Monday Night Wars analysis. But Mike Tyson at first signing with D-Generation X in the moment where Shawn, confronting Mike Tyson, grabs that shirt, pulls it off, reveals the DX shirt, but also Mike Tyson coming in after the ref was taken out at the aforementioned WrestleMania match, fast counting, giving Austin the win, and then turning on Shawn Michaels and knocking Shawn Michaels out. So, and speaking of which, next up is the D-Generation X Army. So that match at WrestleMania 14 was the final match for Shawn Michaels for 4 years. This was when he went to his first retirement, and after injuring his back in the casket match at the Royal Rumble against the Undertaker. So, Shawn Michaels was Shawn Michaels was out of commission for the time being. Speaking of commission, he would become a commissioner in WF. But Shawn Michaels is no longer active. So that just left Triple H all by his lonesome. So he recruited other members of D-Generation X. He already had China, but he then recruited the New Age Outlaws, that being the Road Dogg, Jesse James, and the Badass, as later Mr. Ass, and then later Daddy Ass, Billy Gunn. And so they recruited. X-Pac was recruited as well, having come off a stint as 6 in WCW as part of the NWO and everything. It's crazy that 6, X-Pac, Sean Ullman, 1-2-3 Kid, what have you, was part of probably the 2 biggest factions within the Monday Night War. That is definitely crazy to think about. So they formed the D-Generation X Army. And we're up to their normal shenanigans, including them pulling up in a very iconic moment, pulling up to WCW, who I believe their headquarters. I believe it directly was their headquarters. With the tank in the full army guard, or knocking on the door, or just really firing a major shot within the Monday Night Wars. But speaking of which, let's see what's going on in WCW at the time. So. The first one here that I have for WCW is his Hulk Hogan and Dennis Rodman / Hollywood Hogan and Dennis Rodman going against DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, and Karl Malone, the Mailman. So, wrestling crossed over with basketball. So, Dennis Rodman was friends with Hogan, and had been associated with Hogan within WCW. So, of course, when Hogan turned heel, Dennis Rodman also joined up with the NWO and everything. Meanwhile, I guess DDP and Karl Malone had some type of friendship that led to Karl Malone being brought in, and they built towards and faced off at Bash at the Beach in 1998, and the stars aligned in just a way, and it does happen sometimes with storylines where there's some storylines you build artificially, you build within kayfabe and everything, but then sometimes real life steps in, and real life sometimes can hamper a storyline, but it can also enhance, because the 2 teams facing in the NBA Finals that year happened to be the Chicago Bulls and the Washington Wizards. So you had Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman going head to head on the court, or her doing some promos and everything on TV as well, and then them facing off in the ring. And this was also the Last Dance, Michael Jordan's final NBA season. So just everything coming together. Heather, too bad the match couldn't live up to the hype, though. Oh yeah, very not great match, unfortunately. It's a match that I definitely want to review on the channel. It's definitely been on my radar, but that's for another time. And it's definitely gonna be an awful month. I'll definitely tell you that. But speaking of which, Trouble in Paradise for the NWO, as the NWO would implode. So this had been brewing for a while. Even back then, seeing some early signs as Randy Savage, Macho Man Randy Savage, kind of going against Hogan and everything here. But eventually, Hogan would have his issues with Kevin Nash, and ultimately the NWO split up, forming NWO Black and White / NWO Hollywood, and then NWO Wolfpack. Wolfpack included guys like Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Sting, Conan, and as well. And then NWO Black and White guys like Hogan and Kurt Hennig, or I believe Kurt Hennig was part of the Black and White / Wolfpack. So kind of playing up with the NWO's parents essentially fighting, but they would be united again, and again, I mentioned these are notable storylines. Doesn't necessarily mean good. Like, if anything, this was probably a very damning indictment of just how big the NWO had grown. Perhaps a little too big. It got to the point where they had to splinter off into separate factions. But if you can believe it, it's going to get a whole lot crazier with the NWO. But then next up is the Flock. So Raven jumped ship from ECW to WCW over lack of pay, which is very synonymous with WCW. But not WCW, ECW. But Raven making the jump from ECW to WCW and getting his own stable in the Flock, including members such as Chris Kanyon, Perry Saturn, Billy Kidman, and Sick Boy, and obviously Raven himself, kind of hanging out around ringside areas during the shows and everything, and just overall wreaking havoc. But eventually, the Flock would dissolve. By November, Perry Saturn ultimately won the Freedom, and the Flock, ultimately would disband. And but next up I have is Chris Jericho versus Dean Malenko. Dipping back into the cruiserweight. Chris Jericho. Having this feud with Dean Malenko. If Dean Malenko's the man of 1,000 holds, Chris Jericho's the man of 1,004 holds, including that famous moment where Chris Jericho came out with a big list of all the holds he knew. Most of them being arm bars, of course. But Jericho and Malenko. Jericho had other feuds as well that year, but Malenko was a very notable one, including Chris Jericho making fun of Dean's recently deceased recently deceased at the time, Boris Malenko. Him going at it, Jericho trying to find loopholes any way to hold on to the Cruiserweight Championship. So the Cruiserweight division still getting that spotlight and that lot of love in WCW at the time. But next up is Scott Steiner. So, I reviewed this match a while back. If you haven't already, go check out the review. But at Super Brawl 8, Scott Steiner turned on his brother Rick and joined up with the NWO, and from there pretty much reinvented himself, getting a whole lot more mass, dyeing his hair blonde, coming out with the chainmail and the sirens and the freaks, becoming the big bad booty daddy, of course, and the rest from there is history, as Scott Steiner really going off on his own into his singles career, and Rick Steiner spending pretty much the rest of '98 trying to get back at Scott Steiner, trying to get at him in the ring, trying to get at his younger brother who turned on him. So, but this really began Scott Steiner's major main event push, and Scott Steiner would continue to be a major main eventer even later on into WCW's lifespan. And the last notable storyline that I have, and I'm sure there are several I missed. In fact, I know there is these are a lot of the ones that sprung to mind, and through some research. Are really of note, but the last one we have is Last Call Scott Hall. Pretty much, it's one thing to play off someone's substance abuse issues well after the fact and kind of bring up that history and whatnot, but it's another thing to bring up someone's history with substance abuse while they're still going through those issues of substance abuse. And when it came to Scott Hall, he definitely was going through that, and they played off it in storyline. Including him appearing to be drunk as he would feud with Kevin Nash. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were feuding at one point, as Scott Hall really distanced himself from Kevin Nash and the Wolfpack. One of a lot of people consider to be one of the most tasteless storylines in WCW history. And considering WCW's track record, that's definitely saying something. But very, very tasteless storyline to go through. Honestly, I feel like bringing that stuff up is pretty tasteless. Is anyway, but sometimes you get around it by having it be, oh no, we're only bringing it up because it's a redemption storyline. And make no mistake, WWF/WWE definitely no strangers to it either. In fact, around the same time, they were playing off of Hawk's substance abuse issues as well, that being Hawk of the Road Warriors, and of course, when it comes to Jeff Hardy and stuff like that. When it comes to Jeff Hardy and WWE, that's a well they like going to very often, and it was a the crux of his feud with CM Punk and with Sheamus in around 2019, 2020. Yeah, it's something they definitely go to, but yeah, it was especially tasteless within WCW. But for MVPs, he's for WF. We have Stone Cold Steve Austin, and really, hey, all these guys: Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mick Foley, D-Generation X, and the Corporation, all for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Really being the focal point of stories for the most part through 1998 in WF. Meanwhile, in WCW, we have Diamond Dallas Page. He's continuing to do his thing as he continues his rise to the main event scene, including almost taking the title from Goldberg in the main events that hardly anybody got to see at Halloween Havoc 98. And speaking of which, Goldberg, as he continues his rise, and he would win the WCW WCW World Heavyweight Championship from Hogan later in the year. We have the Cruiserweight division and the Cruiserweight division on fire, or oftentimes outperforming the main event scene. We have Sting because has a cool, or is Sting and continuing to do his thing and everything, and the NWO kinda, because they were a big entity, but you can tell people were starting to get kind of sick of them, especially now that they split off into the two sides. Now, people still liked the NWO for the most part, especially Wolfpack and everything, but yeah, kind of starting to overly balloon at this point. But nevertheless, that's going to do it for this episode of the Monday Night Wars. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please do me a favor: like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, and turn on post notifications so you know every time I upload a video so you can see when it drops. And let me know in the comments below your thoughts on this episode. And yeah, things are heating up, especially on the WF side. But how will things go as we move into the final year of the not just the 20th century, but the previous millennia? Let's find out. But nevertheless, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Peace.